Breaking news today on Seculo is there concerns over the Queen's health. So what happens next in Britain? We'll talk about it today on Seculo.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Seculo.
Doctors are apparently and reportedly becoming concerned for Queen Elizabeth II's health. Buckingham Palace said she is currently being advised to remain under medical supervision and remains comfortable at this hour at Balmoral Castle.
We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110.
7 decades on the throne, she has increasingly handed duties over to Prince Charles as she has suffered from mobility issues.
And now your host, Jordan Seculo.
All right, we're taking your calls at 1-800-684-3110. As the news out of Buckingham Palace announcing, this just after a couple of days after a new prime minister was welcomed in by the Queen, by Queen Elizabeth. And now there is a discussion about, I think if you use terms that we're used to in the United States, when you hear remaining comfortable and under medical supervision, that sounds like, in a lot of cases, that sounds like hospice, so that similar kind of care. And it's certainly the UK is bracing for that, whether it's Parliament reactions. You're also seeing even an announcement that King Charles is going to prepare to go by King Charles III. So that's already being given out to the media. This is actually from the palace, not leaking out. They're actually putting this that's out. What's important to state, I think, right off the bat, is this is the palace press office preparing the country and the world for what could be the passing of a queen who has been a staple in most people's lives for most of, maybe all of their life. And for one thing, from your entire life and my entire life.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, she's been the queen since 1952. She served in the women's army during World War II. Andy Economo just came back. Andy, you just came back from England. Well, let's talk about first, what is the role of the queen under the British system? Because it's not like the queens of history in the sense that the monarchy's role is different than it was 300 years ago.
That's right, Jay. Since 1688, the monarch and the Glorious Revolution that occurred that year, the monarch in England advises, consents, counsels, encourages, and has got an advisory role rather than a ruling role. It is said that the monarch reigns but does not rule. In other words, the prime minister is bound to listen to her or his advice, their counsel. They meet with them every Tuesday. The contents of that meeting have never been disclosed throughout the 15 prime ministers that Queen Elizabeth has had since she became queen in 1952, but she does not rule in the sense of the kings and queens that preceded her in an absolute monarchy context.
Is it, there's this discussion of what's a constitutional monarchy versus a democratic monarchy. Where does England fall in that?
England is a constitutional monarchy. England does not have a written constitution, but it has a constitution that consists of statutes and traditions that have been handed down, and that is very, very dutifully followed by Parliament and the sovereign. The sovereign does not get involved in political disputes. The sovereign does not get involved in election campaigns. The sovereign does not make political speeches. The sovereign does not endorse candidates. Those are things that go between the Liberal Democrats or the Tories, the Labour Party, and the sovereign simply oversees that. Occasionally in British history, the sovereign has injected himself a little more than is necessary in constitutional terms in Britain into what is going on, and that has created some kind of problem, and so they stay out of politics.
All right, folks, so if you got questions about this, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. I think we get back to a little bit more about the significance of the transition, what that looks like, how that happens as well, how it impacts. There's a new government in the UK, a new prime minister as well.
Just 2 days ago.
Just a couple of days ago was with the Queen, and people saw that photo. And then this announcement. This is an announcement. I think I want to keep making that clear. These are official announcements coming from Buckingham Palace, and these are not leaks or speculation. We get back. 1-800-684-3110. Go to aclj.org as well as New Peace Up. He's going to be joining us later in the broadcast by Secretary Pompeo.
breaking news from the United Kingdom. A statement just released by Buckingham Palace. This is how it reads. Following further evaluation this morning, the Queen's doctors are concerned for Her Majesty's health and have recommended she remain under medical supervision.
This statement is very concerning, guys. So much so the Prime Minister, Evelyn, said those words that the entire nation is deeply concerned right now. But I have to say, it's not just this nation, it's really the world. I think people in America, people around the Commonwealth have become so used to Queen Elizabeth as the head of state the last 70 years. So to get this kind of information about her health, it's shocking, it's surprising, and we're all just waiting to see what happens next.
She's the Queen. She's not a political figure. She has not been involved in British politics or in global politics in that sense. But just by virtue of the amount she has lived through and the numbers of heads of state she has met around the world, she's had an impact.
She's had 15 prime ministers during her reign. Her first was Winston Churchill, born in 1874.
I don't think this is just for people of the United Kingdom either, Willie. I think for people around the world, it is impossible to imagine a figure with this longevity who has seen so much of what has happened on this planet in the last 70 years. She has come out of the post-Second World War period. She lived through that. She served driving Land Rovers and mending car engines, learning the basics of mechanics during the Second World War. She lived all through the Cold War. She has lived through all of the, the social and cultural and political revolutions that we have seen as we celebrated, I think, during the Platinum Jubilee. It was almost a big thank you from the British public to her years of service and the way that she has held the monarchy so immaculately, really, over the last 70 years. It's hard to imagine somebody doing the job better than she has done it.
All right, welcome back to Seculo. Next time in the broadcast, Harry Hutchinson is going to be joining us to talk about the European energy crisis, how that could affect us here at home. We talked about it a little bit earlier in the week. But when you see the prices that they are paying, I think this needs to be a warning to all of us here.
Get ready.
Because, again, we're just getting into the months. We're not even really there yet, but where people think about start turning on the heat in their home. And you might be in a place where you're still using, air conditioning a lot, too. All of that is energy prices. And so, again, this is, I think, something that's going to impact the United States. It could be after the midterms, too, when you really start feeling it. But we're going to talk about that with Harry Hutchinson as well. We've got a new email out. If you're on the ACLJ email list, you'll know you'll have received it. This is about the ACLJ action on the pro-life speech that the Biden administration is trying to censor, trying to categorize it as harassment speech on places like Christian college campuses, anyone who is that Title IX applies to in the federal code. So they're putting this rulemaking through. You're able to comment. We've set it up at ACLJ Action, 2 different places on the homepage now, on acljaction.org, where you can sign up and put in your comment. That does not cost a thing to do. Yesterday we were at about 1,000. We're already at over 4,000 comments, and that's what we want to do. In our email, we said we want to flood the zone. So flooding, that can delay the rulemaking process. And we actually encourage you, we have the pre-written kind of script for you there, but we encourage you to add 3 or 4 sentences to make yours unique as well. So this is something you can do. You can take action together, strength in numbers, and it does not cost you anything to do, just a little bit of your time at acljaction.org.
So, Queen Elizabeth has reigned, Will pointed this out, it's a very good point, for 30% of U.S. history. She's been on the crown on the throne for basically 70 years. The whole world is watching this right now, as the reports are that the immediate family is joining going to the Queen's bedside. So, Andy, we were just talking about the fact that it's the kind of monarchy it is in one part ceremonial. She does ask the Prime Minister-elect to form the government, but yet the whole world is looking at this. So, and you've studied this, I know, for a very long time. Why is this such a big role globally when the powers are basically advisory?
Well, because of the British impact that it has had on the world. Remember, Jay, that there was a period of time when the boast was that the sun does not set on the British Empire. British culture, British language, the English language, the civilization, the traditions have spread throughout the world, from the Far East to Latin America, to the American colonies, to Africa, which was largely held by the British and other European powers. So England and Britain became very important, and therefore we look at this monarchy as an archetype of the monarchies that we wish, if you're going to have a constitutional monarchy, to follow. And there was a point in time in American history where there was a question of whether or not the form of government would be a monarchy, although George Washington turned that down for a constitutional republic, as you have pointed out so many times. But the English monarchy is important because its tentacles spread so far and so wide. And Queen Elizabeth has served as the archetype. She said when she became the queen in 1952, "All my life I shall serve, whether it be long or short, the people of the British Empire, the Commonwealth, what it ultimately became." And she has done an admirable and fantastic job against all odds. Changes in the Windsor family that we know about, divorces, scandals, and so forth. The Queen has always come out unscathed because she has been above that. And she has had a glorious reign. And in fact, this is a reign that will be historically one of the most significant in the long course of British history.
Here's what the Queen said on her coronation back in 1952. Take a listen.
"I declare before you all that my whole life shall be devoted to your service."
So, and in fact, before that time when she was just a princess, she actually served in World War II.
Yeah, she makes that point, that she knows how to fix a Land Rover and she can get under a Jeep. There she is driving a Jeep, actually, but she has actually, in her older age, had occasion to get under the bonnet, which is the hood for those of us who are Americans, of a car, and adjust a carburetor and fix it. And she was in Buckingham Palace with her parents when it was bombed by the Nazis during the war, and she said, along with her mother, also named Queen Elizabeth, that "I'm glad we were bombed because now we can look the West End of London in the face because of the bombings that they experienced as well." Very popular monarch, very well loved, very highly respected. Why, Jay? Because she kept her place.
It was interesting also that during World War II, that the Nazis targeted Buckingham Palace because the initial thought was they would not attack Buckingham Palace, but the fact is for the Nazis, it was a symbolic move to go to the Queen or then the King's residence and try to destroy it.
Well, that's exactly correct. And they didn't destroy it, but they bombed and destroyed a significant part of it. But it turned around the other way because it gave the people because the King George and Queen Elizabeth were so popular, it gave them greater confidence and love for their monarch, who they said, "We were bombed," the people said, "and they were bombed too, so we're all in the same boat together." And this is what put them together. And I think it's important that her first prime minister was Winston Churchill. Think about this. A man born in 1874. He was absolutely in love with Queen Elizabeth. He became the prime minister after Clement Attlee. And when she became queen, he was her first prime minister. And I was going through the names of all the prime ministers in my mind today that she had: Harold Macmillan, Anthony Eden, Tony Blair, David Cameron, John Major, and so forth and so on through today to the last one who she asked to form a government just a few days ago, Liz Truss, who happens to have her own name, Elizabeth. What an irony.
I think, too, this is important. It's important for people, too, at a time when there's been a lot of uncertainty in Europe. There's war in Europe as we speak, and this question about the NATO alliances and how this all works and these impacts. I think she's weathered storms that have been, I think, unique for our country to take note of, too, because they did have a massive wave of domestic terrorism in their country.
Oh, yeah.
For decades that they dealt with. So it was not,
it was the Ireland.
Right, with the IRA, and you had those threats against that killed her family members, that targeted their family members, but also having to kind of govern through that and be that stable force, whether it's all of the conflicts that we've seen in our lifetime, in addition to what was happening there domestically as well. And I think too, just everybody, that's this significant shift in it's called the cultural shift is going to be immense. You saw also, I think something that she did that goes back to earlier part of her was she really oversaw what some people would call the dismantling of the United Kingdom, but really the independence of a lot of these former colonies and countries that were under their reign, and allowed them to govern themselves, self-governance, and in a peaceful way.
Yeah. She really was the main architect of a lot of that, Andy.
Well, I think that's a very good observation by Jordan, because most of the British colonies gained independence under the reign of Queen Elizabeth. It all started with India and Pakistan in 1947 when they split and got independence. That was under George VI. But the dissolution of the British Empire through devolution and colonies getting independence, Nigeria in 1960, Ghana, and so forth, Rhodesia, northern southern Rhodesia taking new names, Kenya, Uganda, Tanganyika, for example, Guyana, and so on. All these countries gained their independence from Britain in the time of Queen Elizabeth's reign. But what is significant, Jay and Jordan, is that they continued as members of the British Commonwealth. So from being part of the
What does that mean, Andy? What does that mean for people? Because you hear the term that they were part of the British Commonwealth.
For the people of the U.S., too, if you haven't been there, you see this a lot of times in the Caribbean.
Right. What did it mean? What does it actually mean? Yeah.
It means they share a common culture, a common heritage, a common trade zone, a commonality of legal institutions, because so much of British law and British culture has been spread through these colonies, now independent countries. And so the Commonwealth, it means, and essentially this loose group and association of countries that have a common skein and thread with the then called the mother country, England. And this includes, again, I was going through the list, Australia, New Zealand, too.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Andy. We appreciate that. We're going to have Harry Hutchinson joining us because as we're talking about the situation with the Queen, we've got a situation in Europe with energy that is could have a really dramatic impact on the United States. And Jordan, you think that impact may not be felt miraculously until after the midterms?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's still feeling the impact. The price of the pump went down a little bit, but there's still massive inflation there. This would be your energy bill at home. So while a lot of us, depending on where you live in the country, still dealing with a lot of heat, so you're running energy that way, and then you get into winter. The question is, when will the impact of Europe start really being felt here in your energy bills? Some people have already been feeling that, depending on where you live in the country. Because there are people there, and businesses especially, small businesses, where their energy costs have gone up 1,000% a month. I mean, that would put a lot of businesses out of business. 1,000%. We'll be right back.
Europe is facing its worst gas supply crisis ever this winter, linked to the war in Ukraine. Prices are soaring, and major economies like Germany are considering rationing when the cold weather hits.
Gazprom, the Russian energy behemoth, which delivers natural gas to Europe, will further reduce its shipments to the continent, sparking major questions. What is this winter going to look like for some of the largest economies on Earth?
A sort of economic war between Europe and Russia because of that pipeline that you were just mentioning. Russia won't reopen that pipeline unless sanctions against Russia are lifted.
Don't know how far they're going to go in terms of weaponizing energy. They've basically said, as you said, no gas through Nord Stream 1. Are they going to cut off Turk Stream? Are they going to basically suspend all gas through Ukraine? Are they going to take Europe to zero?
We're looking at £3,500 a year, maybe going up to £5,000 or £6,000 a year. You take that out of an average income of £35,000 a year after tax, you're looking at 20% of people's net income going on energy.
A good part of their industry will shut down this winter. That's inflationary effects across the industry. If Russia plays politics with cutting back oil exports, we could see oil prices double from where they are today. So, yeah, these things have global ramifications.
When Donald Trump spoke to the UN in 2018 and said the Germans were making a huge mistake, becoming dependent upon Russia, well, they all laughed at him. Well, to use a quote that I've used before once or twice, who's laughing now? Right. Because Trump was right. Yeah. Energy independence in an uncertain world is vital.
The last thing I'm going to say is Vladimir Putin didn't just threaten to cut off energy supplies. He also said he may not allow Ukraine's grain to go out to market. Remember, there was this deal with Turkey. He basically said we may not allow this to go forward. So we're going to have a food crisis as well.
All right, welcome back to Secchio. We'll continue to monitor the news out of Buckingham Palace on the Queen, and we just wanted to do that kind of this, get you all up to speed on what would happen if she did pass, what the news is coming out, of course, the historical context and how it plays into the current contexts too. What would what would a King Charles role look like? I think we got to that. We got everybody updated there. There's another crisis out of Europe right now, this energy crisis in Europe, and the question is, how will it affect us here at home? Harry Hutchinson's joining us now. He's got a new piece up to at aclj.org called "A Looming Energy Collapse Forces Europe to Confront the Possibility of Another Dark Age Ahead." I mean, Harry, we've heard these numbers of 1,000% increases in bills for businesses, and I think people hear that and they think, I mean, even doing that math in your head, that is something you're not budgeting for. That's not rainy day fund. That's put you out of business fund, or could cause massive economic problems.
You are precisely correct. So if you look at Great Britain, for instance, up to 60% of the factories in Great Britain may have to shut down in the next 6 months. In Germany, they're talking about a 200% increase in electricity. In the Czech Republic, 70,000 people filled the public square in Prague. Why? They were protesting over higher energy costs. You've seen a farmers' revolt in the Netherlands. The Sri Lankan government has collapsed. Argentina is on the verge of collapse. The government in Italy has collapsed. And meanwhile, the German government has said this to the German people: we are going to put the Ukrainians first before the interest of the Germans. What does that mean? It means a prolonged conflict between Russia and the Ukraine, and Russia is the leading source of energy for most of Western Europe. Keep in mind, 4 or 5 years ago, President Trump delivered a speech at the United Nations wherein he warned Germany of a day of reckoning to come if they continue to depend on Russia. Guess what? That day has now come. And keep in mind, when President Trump gave the speech, the German delegation was laughing. Guess what? Vladimir Putin is now laughing at the Germans. So we face a problem in Europe, and it has implications for the United States.
So the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, announced that the situation with that Ukraine's nuclear plant, that is supposedly the largest nuclear facility in Europe, has suffered damage as part of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Last week, the Russian energy giant announced that it would not recommence European gas deliveries through Nord Stream 1 pipeline. So the question is this going to have a dramatic effect, Harry, obviously, in Europe. I mean, absolutely. But what about the United States?
Well, it will drive up demand for natural gas from the United States. And then that will have a knock-on effect in the United States, driving up natural gas prices here. Oil prices may also rise as well because there are still a few electric power plants that are powered by oil as well as gas. Meantime, Europe has shut down, or it plans to shut down, most of its nuclear-powered plants. So at the end of the day, we have a confluence of circumstances, but at the leading edge of the spear, we have pure incompetence with respect to the Biden administration, which shut down the Keystone Pipeline on day one of his presidency. He's basically cut back on oil and gas leases, and he's just signed an Inflation Reduction Act bill that basically puts the entire nation's energy supply at risk. Why? Because he wants us to rely on an unstable source of power, solar power and wind power. Who could forget what happened to Texas last winter? 200 people died. there was $300 billion in damage. And now we have rolling blackouts essentially in California. Meanwhile,
how does that work, by the way, when they're also pushing at the same time, Harry, in California for electric vehicles? When they're having rolling electricity blackouts?
It illustrates the potential future, meaning that you and I, to the extent that we buy electric cars, we will be dependent on the government. The government will have the power to prevent us from driving, from going to work, from doing all sorts of things. Keep in mind, the European Union president has suggested that they are going to make mandatory in Europe controls from the government on household thermostats. Guess what? In California, this also means they're going to put controls on your ability to power your electric vehicle. What does that mean at the end of the day? You and I, if we buy electric cars, we will have to depend on gas generators in order to have control of our own destiny. And I think it's absurd at the end of the day, but that is the plan that the World Economic Forum has embraced, and that is the plan that Joe Biden has embraced. Meanwhile, the new prime minister in Great Britain, she is opening up leases in the North Sea. She is eliminating the ban on fracking. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has gone in the opposite direction. So, long term, if the Biden administration's policies stand, that means that you and I will suffer pain at the pump.
Serious economic consequences.
And serious economic consequences. Inflation will likely rise. Keep in mind that today mortgage rates are at the highest rate in the last 14 years. So there are problems on the horizon. And so I would urge listeners to get active before the November election. We need to change our approach to energy in the United States.
You know, it's interesting because one of the things ACLJ Action that you have is one of the aspects you're working on with the team that does ACLJ Action, which is the team that does the policy issues, the legislative issues, is energy.
Yeah, energy independence and working back on what that actually means for the United States. I mean, it's not really difficult policy-wise. It just takes a change in leadership. And like Harry was talking about, this idea of a different approach. People like Elon Musk, who benefit off the sale of electric cars greatly, have said, we're not ready to go there. We don't have the right power system set up to charge all if everyone went electric. That right now we're just in that early phases of early adapters figuring out. And some of those early adapters are already feeling this pain in California. Like Harry said, there are images out there of people using the gas-powered generators to charge their electric vehicles because of brownouts and blackouts occurring right now in California. And, of course, in the California government, cities, statewide, telling people not to charge vehicles or telling what times of day not to charge people. But, yeah, this is a top issue for ACLJ Action. And I think, again, it's one where it takes a leadership change and some small moves that not a lot of heavy lifting to completely change where we are.
By the way, we are 4,481 comments submitted so far, so we're about 519 away from 5,000, which would be great. So, Jordan, tell people in the last 30 seconds here what they need to do on the life issue to really help.
Yeah, I want you to go to acljaction.org, and you can submit. It doesn't cost you a thing at acljaction.org. We need you to submit a comment. We have a pre-written comment. We encourage you to write a couple extra sentences of your own. At acljaction.org, it goes to the Department of Education. This is to protect pro-life speech. acljaction.org. Take action today.
In my time in service, both as the CI Director and the Secretary of State, I watched the good work that the ACLJ was doing here in the States and all across the world.
The ACLJ's work at the UN overseas is incredibly important.
We have on our team policy experts. They're all engaged in foreign policy issues.
We actually try to go in and do something positive and actually affect change.
We had a series of cases primarily dealing with religious liberty.
Nations that had more religious freedom had better democracies.
We've taken the First Amendment, and that has been our cornerstone. It's to defend the rights of people of faith.
We not only hold our government accountable, but we hold other governments accountable.
You have to actually be committed to fighting it out, or else you'll never win.
Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. Go to aclj.org today. That's aclj.org.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Seculo. And now your host, Jordan Seculo.
All right, folks, welcome back to Seculo. So we opened up the show, watching the news about the Queen, and if there's any more updates today, while we're live on the broadcast, we'll provide that to you. The families gathered there. This is all official statements, too, coming out. These are not like leaks and official statements coming out. And if you read it the way we would read it in the United States, when you hear comfortable, it sounds similar to like a hospice kind of, whether it's like a home hospice care. And at that moment, you don't really know how long people may survive. But we talked about the long history there, her accomplishments, and how historically significant she's been. We'll continue to watch that. I want to encourage you to go to acljaction.org. We're just talking about when we finished the first half of the broadcast. But if you're on the ACLJ email list, this email went out just about a half hour before we went on the radio broadcast. So we're encouraging people, you have until September 12th to put in a comment to the Department of Education. They are trying to amend Title IX of the Education Amendments Act to make pro-life speech harassment. Now, because there's protections in there for pregnant women, people who are pregnant, of course, employment issues, school issues, and the harassment there. It makes sense. On this, it's if someone who is going to terminate a pregnancy, which one, I don't know why that's being necessarily publicly discussed, doesn't have to be. But two, even if it's not publicly discussed, let's say someone you're around and there's a pro-life group on campus, or it's a pro-life university, and there's someone there who had an abortion. I don't even know if you have to know that they've had an abortion to then commit harassment under Title IX. So there's a comment period. This change hasn't been made yet. We want to, as we talked about in the email, flood the zone, flood with comments. And we encourage you, 4,481 people have already taken that action at acljaction.org. 4,481 actions taken on this. To submit your comment to the Department of Education, all you have to do is go to acljaction.org. And right there, twice on the homepage, you'll have a place to go where you can get a quick update on the issue, and then right to actually submitting the comment and acting now. So I encourage you to do that. If you actually look at the comment box, if you get to that step, it's a live, like, Word document kind of situation. So you can edit that. You can add your own comments to it. We encourage you to do that. Again, acljaction.org. We'd like to get to 5,000 comments by the end of the broadcast or somewhere near there. So we'll be updating you throughout this second half hour of the broadcast. But it's been a great response already. Once that email went out, I mean, we went from about 980 or so comments to over 4,400 right now. So over 4,400. Let's try to get it to 5,000 by the end of the broadcast.
And look, folks, this is the way that when your voice matters. And we set up ACLJ Action because we can impact legislative analysis, issue advocacy, and, of course, ACLJ handling the legal work. So we've really increased the scope of what can be done. But this is another one. We had a success the other day on a pro-life matter out of a state where we were working with both the Attorney General and other groups and ACLJ Action to get a constitutional amendment defined properly so people would know that they were enshrining abortion in their state constitution. And we were successful in our suggestions on language there, and which accurately reflected what this bill actually, what the language would have actually done. Here, you've got an attempt to literally target free speech of pro-lifers. It's going to really impact the college campuses where pro-life groups are already under tremendous scrutiny. So I'd like to see us over 5,000, if possible, by the time we're off the broadcast in the next 25 minutes or so. That's another 500 or so. That's a big number, but we encourage you to do it. ACLJAction.org. Also, join ACLJ Action. It's $25, and you can actually become a member of ACLJ Action.
That's right. People are asking, too, can this affect high schools? It absolutely does affect high schools. It affects a lot of private schools, too, because if you take any federal funding whatsoever, Title IX applies to you. So it doesn't matter if you're a private institution or even a charter school. And so you see how this impacts at all levels of education. And the idea here, this is the trick by the Biden administration trying to, again, make a pro-life speech harassment, which then you can take action under Title IX, the individual, the federal government. We want to defeat this rule, and we need your help to do it by putting in the comment. It doesn't cost you a thing to do that at acljaction.org, but as you mentioned, you can join ACLJ Action for $25.
To the southern border right now, preliminary Customs and Border Protection stats are out for the month of August. Total apprehensions now over 186,000. Total gotaways, 42,000.
It's not like somebody walks over and that's not how.
Exactly what's happening. Thousands of people are walking in a day. Some of them turn themselves over. Some of them are caught. Tens of thousands a week are not. That is what is happening.
She says they don't walk across the border. Well, 1.7 did last year, 1.7 million. And this year, marked by word, we're going to be at 2.4, almost 2.5, which is 700,000 more than last year, which is a record. And when that many people come across, up to 70%, John, of agents are off the line processing. Yeah. That causes 70% of the border wide open, and that's when they move the fentanyl across, and that's why we have a record number of fentanyl deaths.
A record number of migrants have died crossing the U.S.-Mexico border this year. Homeland Security telling CNN 748 have died coming into the country, up from 557 during 2021, which was another terrible year.
Our open border policies are the most dangerous and deadly for the migrants themselves.
Right.
They have encouraged. That's why, look, when you have 2 million, over 2 million in one fiscal year, think about it. The number of dead migrants have increased. The number of migrants that have suffered at the hands of cartels and other dangerous criminals via sexual assault, and the number of those now that have fallen prey to trafficking have all exponentially increased and shattered every record.
The numbers are historic high, and this administration doesn't say a word about it. And they want to talk about how humane their policies are. It's not humane when you get over 1,300 migrants dying in U.S. soil because you have an open border, which causes the most vulnerable people to put themselves in the hands of criminal cartels and make this journey.
All right, folks, Secretary Pompeo is about to join us right on the broadcast, so you don't want to miss that. Share with your friends and family. So we get into energy issues. He's got a new piece up. And folks, welcome back to Secular. We're joined by our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And Secretary Pompeo has got a new piece up at aclj.org. We're seeing these unprecedented energy costs rising in Europe. You tweeted out yesterday, Secretary Pompeo, the energy crisis in Europe is a warning for us. The policies that gave Putin leverage over Europe are the same energy policies that Democrats are pushing here. I mean, it seems like the Biden administration is following the European playbook, which means if they do, Secretary Pompeo, that Americans better brace themselves for very high energy costs.
Jordan, I actually just got back from Europe. They are paying today about 10 times what the average American is paying to heat their home in the winter or cool their home in the summer. We're on the cusp of heading down that same path. When you shut down the capacity to produce American energy, simple things like fracking, to be able to mine environmentally friendly ways, this is what Europe has done for 10 years. They walked away from nuclear power. They walked away from coal power, and they had no solution to make sure that affordable energy was available for workers to manufacture and for families to do the simple things like drive the car and take their kids to soccer practice or to church. We're headed that same way. God bless. I saw the new Prime Minister Truss today said she was going to allow fracking in the United Kingdom. I think that's a great solution, right? First, help yourself. I wish Governor Hochul in New York would do the same thing, and I wish the Biden administration would stop pushing these woke ESG policies that are denying us the very energy that has allowed America to be so prosperous for so many years.
You know, Mike, one of the things that's so ironic, as you know, California is putting this huge push for electronic vehicles, and you know they say they don't want to have gas-controlled vehicles in the next 10 years. They want the sales to stop. They want electric vehicles as the not only primary but as really the only method of transportation. Meanwhile, they're calling for energy conservation, electric energy conservation, saying the grids are overworked right now, and they're having rolling brownouts and blackouts. So they have, on one hand, they have this push on the green energy, what they call green energy situation, the electric vehicles, and then on the other hand, they're saying basically you can't use them because we don't have the energy for you to power them up.
Jay, I'd cry. I'd laugh if it wasn't so damn sad.
I know.
It's truly incomprehensible that political decision makers tied to this climate change faith. We can all do data and facts. We should all go work to make sure that our environment is safe and our water's clean and our air is safe. Those are good things. We've been good stewards of the land in places like Kansas where farmers work. But to walk away from the lifeblood that provides food security for America, affordable energy for families, natural gas so that manufacturing in America can stay here and not go someplace else, those are the things that we've just stepped away from. And California has always led the way in this regard. When they set rules on energy, often the rest of the nation follows. And we can see what this is going to mean to ordinary Californians who are simply trying to live their lives and take care of their families. They're going to be told to buy unaffordable cars and then told not to use them.
You've got a new piece up at aclj.org on the crisis at our southern border, too. And there's a lot of reporting on just the drug crisis in the United States as well. But, Joe Biden, we've seen his presidency 20 months, and the crisis keeps growing. But we're told that, there's no issue there. And there's so much distraction. Is that what it's all about? You think that, this is post-midterm, suddenly they have this, come to Jesus moment on the border, Secretary Pompeo, or is it just that the liberals in the party will not allow for real actions to secure our border, to protect Americans right from the top from this the drug, the fentanyl that we're seeing all across the country, affecting every aspect of life, rich and poor and everyone in between?
Jordan, my sense is that the Democrat Party has been largely taken over on this issue by the hard, progressive, open borders left, who truly believe in their heart of hearts that it is somehow inconsistent with American tradition to have secure borders. We all know it's not. We all know that lawful immigration has been the lifeblood of our country, but allowing now hundreds of thousands a month to come across our border in a way that we have no idea who they are, what they're bringing, what their history has meant, will mean bad things for America. We've talked about fentanyl coming across. We know that the risk of people on the terror watch list coming across increases as the days go by. This will end badly. We have an obligation, indeed a responsibility to secure our borders. We don't have to go to root causes. The vice president always talks about going back to root causes. We know how to slow illegal immigration to a trickle. We did it for 4 years. I pray that this administration will get the cooler heads inside the Democrat Party will prevail. They will come to understand that preserving our southern border, protecting America from the threat of massive illegal immigration will come to be something that they can stand up for and defend. And then we can make sure that we get our workforce issues right.
Mr. Secretary, in our next segment, we're going to be joined by Jeff Ballamon, who's senior counsel for the ACLJ, runs our office in Jerusalem. And he's over there, and he's having to do some reassurance to leaders, especially in Judea and Samaria, as to the United States, that most Americans are standing with Israel despite the rhetoric that's coming out of the White House. But I've got to turn the attention to the Middle East, right to Iran, where you've got a very united Israel, a very united Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Gulf states, and a very serious concern about that we're about to enter into a deal that makes absolutely no sense. How serious is it, and what are you hearing as to the likely timetable on the Iran nuclear deal? We're getting word from our folks in the region it could be announced within weeks.
Jay, it does look like they're getting close to giving up on things that matter to America. They're going to provide hundreds of millions of dollars to the Iranian terrorists who will only use it to put at risk the nation of Israel, and, of course, us here at home in America as well. It's interesting when you look at the lineup. You laid it out, right? Israel, along with the Sunni Arab states, are all against this deal. The Russians and the Chinese, European powers, are for it. We should walk away. We should make sure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon and doesn't have the money to put Israel and America in harm's way and continue to terrorize these regions and use extortion to get what it is that Iran wants. It's not in America's interest.
You obviously, with your background, you served not only as our Secretary of State, you also served as the director of this Central Intelligence Agency. We often say that Iran is the largest exporter of terrorism in the world, which they clearly are. So I try to figure out what in the world, other than protecting the Barack Obama legacy, would this administration be pushing this deal, which makes no sense to anybody? Why would they be doing it?
It is the idea that there's this moral equivalence amongst the world, and why should we penalize the Iranians as against the Sunni Arab states, that we need this balance. It is fraught with error. It will create the risk of more countries becoming nuclear weapon states. It is bad for the United States. And don't forget, That money, none of that money that the Iranians are given as a result of sanctions relief, if we sign up for this silly deal, none of that money will go to ordinary Iranians. It will all go to the kleptocrats that are part of the Iranian leadership, and it will be used for malign purposes. Israel will be more at risk, and so will we here at home.
You know, final question for you, Secretary Pompeo, switching to China, because the UN finally put out a report detailing the humanitarian crimes against the Uyghurs in China. Do you think it's too little too late, though, at this point for the world to impact the decision-making of the Chinese Communist Party when it comes to, as your administration, when you were Secretary of State, recognized the genocide? The Biden administration has continued to recognize that genocide.
It's never too late, Jordan, to do the right thing by people all across the world. The simple work of nations uniting to declare what the Chinese are doing is genocidal. The attempt to destroy an ethnicity is something that is so horrific, so monumental that it's never too late. The Biden administration has had the right language. I pray that they will find the right deeds to actually convince Xi Jinping that he needs to change his ways there in Western China.
Yeah, it's always great to have you, Secretary Pompeo, and part of the team at the ACLJ as our senior counsel for global affairs. And let me encourage you folks to check out his new piece up at aclj.org as well. That's the Biden administration must acknowledge the crisis on our southern border. And I think all these issues, we go back to leadership, decision-making, and the ability to step outside of the radical wing, maybe of your political party, and get things done. But it's always great to have Secretary Pompeo with us. Let me give you an update, too, at acljaction.org. As we said, we wanted to get to 5,000 submissions, so you can comment on this new proposed rule by the Biden administration. So this is not legislation, but a rule to a Title IX change that would make pro-life speech equivalent to harassment, or allow people to file harassment claims for being pro-life, having pro-life positions. And this, of course, affects all kinds of parts of education, can affect private education as well, starting in kindergarten. So, again, we only need 199 more submissions. And we've had over 4,000 new comments today through our website at ACLJ Action.
Thank you, everybody, for this. But we do want to get to the 5,000. What do you say we're away? How many?
Just about 199.
All right, folks, we could do this. Again, just go to acljaction.org. Jordan will tell you exactly. And you can add your own comments to it. You can edit that text really easy.
That's right. We've put in the text for you. You should put in your name, address, email, and then you get to the text. You can add text. We're actually encouraging you to add a couple sentences on your own. You click submit. And you'll actually get an email from the Department of Education acknowledging that you submitted your comment. So I think you will see. So we've got this new system created where it goes directly into the Department of Education, but we're able to also put all this together. So strength in numbers kind of situation.
Right.
And so again, go to acljaction.org. We want you to take that action today. You have until September 12th to make the comment. ACLJ will also be on the ACLJ side, putting forward a comprehensive legal analysis comment to this as well, but we want you to also be involved at acljaction.org.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The report is coming out. It shows that not only did Tea Party groups get more scrutiny, but so did a host of other conservative groups.
It was something that no one could believe our government was even capable of doing, and now they were admitting it.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history. To take on the IRS and win, for the ACLJ, life has always been a top issue.
Barbara, I am here at this site because there are thousands of people and millions across America that say abortion's murder.
When you're fighting for the life of the unborn, you're on the right side of history, you're on the right side of law.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life to beat back the abortion juggernaut.
It's very important that we remain hopeful that the courts that the Trump administration was able to impact will give us good rulings that are based in law and sound reasoning.
This is one of the social issues we're winning.
There are historians that point out that religious persecution is at its highest level since the first 3 centuries when the Roman Empire led religious persecution.
A mid-state pastor's family is fighting to bring him home.
We are getting my husband after 7.5 months.
Turkey should not get away with holding my father one more day.
When Brunson was finally released, who meets him at the airport at 2:30 in the morning? Rick Brunell.
I saw Pastor Brunson walk down the stairs of the plane. I was filled with emotion. I told him that we were praying for him. The American people never forgot about him.
I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world.
Back to Sekio. We're joined now by our senior counsel, heads up our office in Jerusalem, ACLJ Jerusalem, Jeff Balaban. And Jeff, you're coming to us live from Jerusalem. I wanted to talk about one of the points you made just for people to kind of get this. There's a lot going on in the world, but specific to Israel is the rise in terrorism that has continued since President Biden's visit. And it was actually, there was an attack where you were yesterday, Jeff. Tell people about this.
Sure. Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, since unfortunately the president said he was coming to Israel and sent messages that he might be more supportive of the Palestinian side, the message was heard loud and clear, and they realized that violence and terror actually pays, and so they've ratcheted up the violence, ratcheted up the terror. Yesterday, I was invited to give a briefing to the head of the Samaria Council, the regional council, of Judea and Samaria. So Samaria has its own regional council with a few dozen communities there. And I was invited to give a security briefing. And sure enough, first of all, on the way there, they sent me an armored vehicle, which hasn't been done in recent years, and I didn't expect it. And they said, yeah, the daily attacks on the roads now, and they'd rather be safe than sorry. And recognize these are families that have to live there and deal with this who don't all have armored vehicles. And then when I got there, I found out that there had been an attack. Some Israeli soldiers on patrol were attacked by somebody wielding a hammer, and ended up. This has basically become a daily occurrence now.
Yeah, Jeff, I think it's important for people to understand that when we talk about Samaria, what are we talking about historically? So I think people, get confused. They view Israel as a kind of one nation, which is right. But when we're talking about an area of Israel, Samaria, what are we talking about?
It's a great question. So people, as many of our viewers are familiar with the Bible, Samaria, the Shomron, appears throughout the Bible. One of the most famous places throughout the Bible, of course, is the city of Shechem. Now they call it Nablus, but that's actually Shechem, and it's now completely dominated by Arabs. But one of the most holy sites in Jewry is there, which is to say the tomb of Joseph. And Joseph's tomb is there, and that was a site of a deadly terror attack last time I visited Samaria. It was right down the hill from where we were. And so there's the altar that Joshua built when the Jews first returned to the land of Israel, entered the land of Israel from the desert. So famously, there's the two mounts, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, where the Jews rededicate themselves to worshiping the God of Abraham. And Joshua builds an altar. And in recent years, they found an altar with pretty dispositive proof that it is actually the remains of Joshua's altar. So this is tremendously historic, and today it is the home of dozens of towns and villages, some very small, some larger. And the head of the council, Yossi Dagan, tells me it's his vision to have 1 million Jews living there. Right now, I don't think it's 100,000.
So, but this is Israel's sovereign territory. I mean, people need to understand this is Israel's sovereign territory. And we're playing a unique role because there's messaging coming out of the White House that has a lot of Israelis very concerned about. You went from a situation where you had the government declare that the Golan Heights were part of Israel's now sovereign territory, and the capital move, of course, to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. These were huge moments in history. And then you've got the word coming out now, which has got the Israeli leadership and, of course, the head of the Samaria Council, obviously concerned about where the United States influence and support is right now, and is it lingering?
That's exactly right. It was what we learned in the last administration was don't listen to the experts and just use logic and understand that if you create facts, if you recognize the reality that this is the Jewish homeland that always has been, even though the Jews and the state of Israel has been willing to compromise and give territory and land, desperately seeking some kind of a peace. Well, if you take that away and insist on, no, we're going to create a new state, an Arab state, a terror state, a Palestinian state on Jewish sovereign territory, of course what you're doing is rewarding the Palestinian Authority's terror. The Palestinian Authorities pay for slay. And so President Biden and this administration have, of course, rewarded it. And by the way, we don't have to go there in this conversation, but it is no different than rewarding Iran for its bad actions. In other words, there's a pattern here. They're working with the bad guys, and whether it's senseless or foolish, the result is increased violence, increased terror, increased threat.
Yeah, I think what it's important to point out, too, is there is this governing council. I want to explain that for people because I know our audience, they're very familiar with Israel. They watch the news there about who's the prime minister, what's happening politically there. But this region also has its own governing council, and that's who you've been working with. But just to explain that to people.
Sure. So there are, Israel's obviously a small country. It would be a fairly small U.S. state. And but nonetheless, there are multiple layers of government. So there are city governments and municipal governments. There are regions. In Judea and Samaria, there are several regions. One of them, a large one, is Samaria, and it has its own council, sort of like having a governor who oversees all kinds of projects and developments, land development, road development, services, utilities. So it is a regional council that is elected, and it's an office like many others throughout Israel, which I guess would be the equivalent, as I say, maybe of a state or a territory in another country.
So the next question is, of course, Jeff, and this is we'll conclude with this, is you've got a situation that there's a question of the stability of U.S. support for Israel. And Israel now is in a very unique place with its neighbors because there's more cooperation than there's ever been, including Saudi Arabia, which is not formally assented to the Abraham Accords, but in practicality have. And you mentioned Iran. We just had Mike Pompeo on. I mean, this situation with the Iran nuclear deal looks like it could happen any moment. All that does is destabilize the region.
That's right. It's very hard for all of us who look at this who say, let's say this was speculative and you didn't know the way to approach it and you took a risk and it didn't work out. But we saw that. They've tried this for decades and all it's bred is death. By the way, not just the murder of Jews, but death for Jews and Arabs because the bloodshed mounts, right? And obviously Israel has to respond and has to protect itself. So of course the bloodshed mounts. And they don't seem to care on the other side about human life. But it can't just be foolishness, right? I mean, you're asking the question. I don't have an answer, Jay. They saw it works. We just saw it work in the last administration where we said our ally Israel is a liberal, democratic, moral ally. We give it strength, and all of a sudden there's peace, and there's normalization, and there's cooperation. And now it just seems they want to revert to war and bloodshed and terror. And listen, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're getting what they want.
And what we're doing over there with Jeff's leadership, obviously, is to not only communicate policy, but to work with government leaders across the board to protect Israel's sovereignty as a Jewish state. Thanks, Jeff. We appreciate it. Thanks for giving us the live update from Jerusalem, where the ACLJ has had for over a decade an office that has had great impact. I got to say this, going to ACLJ action for a moment, you've crossed 5,040 comments in just the last push has been the last couple of hours. I mean, it is possible, I guess. Is it possible to get to 10,000?
Yeah, that would be the next. That'd be like the stretch goal to get to 10,000. People will still be, again, it's
Explain
in your
to everybody
inbox.
what it is.
So it's in your if you're on the ACLJ email list, it's in your inbox. But we've got a time until September 12th to submit comments to the Department of Education, specifically on what they want to make a proposed rule change to Title IX to include the termination of pregnancy as basically a protected class that you could then be in trouble with harassment because of pro-life speech. Now, Title IX, because its effect starts in kindergarten and can impact private schools, anyone who takes federal funding at all from the Department of Education. So we want you to take a stand for pro-life speech here. We see what the Biden administration is trying to do. We're taking action at ACLJ Action because of you. So we've got over 5,000 comments. You go there. We have the comment ready for you. Once you add a couple of your own sentences, you click submit. That's all you got to do. ACLJaction.org.